Okay, hi booktube, Aaron here. Today I'm coming to you with a tag. It's just about still Tuesday where I am as I'm filming this, so I think it still counts as Tag Tuesday. Today I'm going to be doing the personal rules for reading tag. This is a tag by MJ from Reading This Life, and it's an open source tag, so people who do the tag can add their own prompts, and the tag keeps changing, evolving, growing as more people do it. And I think she kind of stipulated that once it gets past 10 prompts, that we then start part two. So this is a continuation of part two, and at my last count, this tag has, I think, 15 prompts now, including my own. There might be more, so sorry if I've missed any out, but I've tried to include all the ones I've clocked so far. I was very kindly tagged to do this by Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads and Micah Cummins. So let's get into the tag, and the first 4 prompts here are MJ's original 4 prompts, and then it's kept on growing, so I'll try not to take too long. The first prompt is, do you strive to read every day? If yes, do you do anything different or special to make time within your day? If no, why not? And yes, I do strive to read every day. I feel a little sad when I haven't read that day, although you know, sort of life doesn't always go to plan, so really it's not the end of the world if I don't get any reading in, but all being well, I try to do it at least a little bit every single day. And on a working day, it depends on the week, but sometimes I actually get more reading done on a day when I'm working, because I sort of plan little segments of time, like just before I go into work and on my lunch break and stuff, just to make sure I get a little bit in these little chunks. And it does add up, and I get a fair bit done, sort of commuting and sort of waiting around when I'm not in work. So yeah, I do on a working day, and then I just see how it goes when I have a day off. Number 2, do you always stay within your favourite genres, or do you experiment with reading different genres and subgenres? I think I stay fairly safe. I mean, within the general bracket of what I read, it's mainly sort of classics, and sort of literary, sort of older literary stuff, I suppose. It does sometimes branch out into fantasy, not too much. Need to get a bit better at that. And sometimes it branches out into sci-fi. I'd like it to branch out into sci-fi a bit more. That's something I'm noticing more and more as things go on. And of course, there's a lot of poetry, which is more of a form than a genre, I suppose. But yeah, and then I don't really go outside of that. I don't read too much horror or romance, or I read a bit of non-fiction, not too much in ways of, there's not really much like science or psychology or sort of social stuff in there. It's more, I don't know, sort of more sort of reflective, sort of creative non-fiction, I suppose, is what I'm more into. So it could be a bit more exciting, I suppose. But then, there's lots of ways you can play around with genre, even in the tight area that I like to read in, and particularly with with the older stuff, it doesn't always fit as neatly into the marketed genre boxes that we have for it. It kind of, the lines are a little more fuzzy. Number 3, do you DNF books? So do you say that, do you mark them down as books you did not finish? If yes, what was the last book you DNF'd and the reasons why? If your answer is no, then what drives you to finish a book? And I kind of end up having to answer both sides of this, because I have DNF'd books in the past. It's not something I do very much now. The last book I DNF'd was I think I spoke about this recently, it was The Blood of the Martyrs by Naomi Mitchison, and I just wasn't getting on with it. It seemed intriguing. It was about the church, sort of the early Christian church during the reign of Nero, and this kind of underground world, and she's drawing parallels to to her own time, to Europe in the lead up to the Second World War. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. But I don't know, I just didn't like the way it was executed. It seemed a little heavy-handed, and I just wasn't getting on with it. It got a bit annoying after a little while. And so generally, I just want to push on with books now. Even if they are annoying, I mean, there might be certain stylistic things, and mainly it is stylistic for me most of the time if I'm not enjoying it. But there might be other redeeming factors, and there have been books that I've enjoyed in recent years that I wasn't enjoying right at the beginning, and it just took time to sort of push on, and then they became really quite seminal books for me. They kind of changed the way I thought about certain things, and I think I'll get to those books in a little while. Then number 4, the last of MJ's then, is do you like to read challenging books? If yes, what draws you to them? If no, why do you avoid them? For me, I do quite like a bit of a challenge. I think that's because when I was reading as a teenager, sort of early teens, so I only really got back into reading more regularly sort of in my late teens, sort of just before going away to university, or maybe a couple of years before then. Earlier on in my early teens, it was a challenge to actually pick up a book and finish it. And I think I got used to that. There was a kind of dread, looking at the number of pages that are there and having to work your way through them. It was, I would enjoy it in the end, but there was a dread there, and it felt challenging, even if it wasn't a particularly hard book. And then as I got a little more used to it, I also came to just expect that feeling of there being a bit of a challenge to it. And so I think I just kind of got used to that and keep looking for it. I am learning a bit to relax a little in my reading as well, but sometimes you want a nice leisurely stroll, and sometimes you want a really hard uphill hike in the rain, and I enjoy both. Let's go on to some of the others. So number 5 is is Greg's question. So Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads. He asks, do you read books that have been banned by local authorities? At least to my attention, it's quite hard to answer this for my own local authorities. It seems to be they're a little kinder. And I think there's an interesting thing with literature. When it's banned, it means, almost subliminally that it's kind of being banned or suppressed, because there's that almost subconscious thought that literature means something and can kind of change the way you think. And I feel like that view of literature is a little lost, particularly I think in the UK a bit, and the way we teach it and the way it's encountered in schools. I might not be completely right on this. It's just a hunch. It might be that we just have a much better, a much more tolerant view of literature as well, maybe. But I definitely don't hear about books being banned in my area. However, I think if you're reading a book from any period, I think it is a good idea to get a bit of background, a bit of its history there. And if it has been banned, then that's an excellent way for you to engage with the book and to think about its history. I don't really know, but particularly if a book's being banned right now as well, as I'm looking over to other part of the world, particularly over the pond in the US and in other parts of the world, it does give a certain sense of agency and urgency to your reading. So I don't have a very good answer for that one, so sorry, but I do think it's important to do it. And again, I'm not sure why books don't get banned that much in the UK. It's good that they don't, or maybe I'm not just as plugged in as I should be. The closest thing I heard about it recently was Philip Larkin being taken off like a GCSE exam, one of his poems being used for an exam question. So it's not really the end of the world, is it? Number 6, it's a prompt from Criminoli, and his question is, do you read books by authors whose views you disagree with? And I'm fairly comfortable with this, particularly, in the content of the book itself. I'm not looking for something to agree with. I don't mind a bit of a tug and pull between me and the author, and a bit of, sort of having to engage critically with the author in that way. Although, I'm not looking for the author to tell me anything either, and even if I don't agree with them, if I do agree with them or don't agree with them, if I'm feeling like they're there to tell me something, then I'm not really going to enjoy it that much. But I'm quite used to not agreeing with authors, and I definitely wouldn't necessarily pick up a book, like a non-fiction self-help book, where I just know I'm going to disagree with them. I don't expect to agree with all authors. Number, I think, 7, one of Steve Donohue's questions. Do you clear your mind of preconceptions and biases before you start a new book, or do you go in with axes to grind? I certainly don't go in with axes to grind, but I'm sure I don't do the best job of clearing my mind of preconceptions. There are definitely things I look out for, not quite the same thing, I don't know, I could do better, I'm certainly not going in with axes to grind. Another Steve question. Do you recommend books if you end up really enjoying them? And if so, what form does that recommendation take? Mostly it's here on booktube, usually in my wrap-up videos at the end of a month. Sometimes I do sort of single book reviews or videos or sort of vlogs about certain books. That's fairly rare, but I'd like to do a bit more of that. I think I'm always saying that, but I find it difficult, but I'd like to do more. Let's keep going. A lot more about recommendations here. So Bill Rutenberg asks, what was the last book you recommended, and was there a specific reason for that book, and do people come to you regularly for recommendations? I don't really think people come to me that regularly for recommendations. Sometimes me and my dad talk about books, or me and my sister talk about books, although it's more, we're kind of just thrusting the things we're interested onto each other. It's not necessarily coming to each other for recommendations necessarily. But I've recommended Hemingway to my dad. I think we were talking a bit about him, and even though it's my least favourite Hemingway book so far, I recommended Have and Have Nots, because I don't know, it seems like out of Hemingway's books, it's the closest to like a noir kind of crime book, and that seemed like a good kind of area for my dad, for like a gateway to Hemingway. So I think it worked quite well. And then the next question was from Bill was, what book have you had the most success in recommending? I don't really know, but to kind of give a little more representation to recommendations, I've got 3 for you now, and they kind of fit in with those books I was tempted to DNF earlier. So they're books that I wasn't really getting on with initially, and then I finished them and I loved them. And the first one here, and this was one where it was a fairly thick book, so I was kind of quite scared in the first few pages, the first couple of days of reading, but then I just absolutely loved it after a while, and that's Underland by Robert Macfarlane. Just a terrific book about mankind's relationship to the underland, to underground. Just really, really good. And then this one's a little more folkloric. It's called The People of the Sea by David Thompson. It's about tales of the Selkie, the seal folks. These are stories told mainly on the Scottish Islands and Scottish coast and on the west coast of Ireland. And it's just a really lovely magical book, because it's not just telling you the stories like like a book of fairy tales, but it's the story of the guy meeting the people who tell these stories, getting a taste for their communities, maybe traveling around and then coming back to somewhere he's been before, seeing how it's changed, and it was a moment of real social change, and so it's really a fascinating book. I think it was maybe around the 1960s that it was written. And then we've got David Gange, the Frayed Atlantic Edge. So a similar area there to the People of the Sea. He's kayaking from Shetland down to Cornwall, and also along the west coast of Ireland, all in little trips, and investigating the shore and meeting people and getting to know the art and culture and literature of these places. So yeah, really, really good. And they're all books that I wasn't loving initially, and now I really love them and keep thinking about them and coming back to them in my mind. So let's keep going. I don't want to keep you for too long. On to part 2 of the tag now. We're our feet are firmly in part 2. This is Micah Cummings' question. Do you take notes or annotate while you read? If so, what form does it take? I don't really have much of a set rule for annotation. I do it sometimes. It's mainly underlining and starring certain passages that stand out, particularly in a book that might have lots of notes, introductions and things like that, just so that I can quickly see a certain points, if I want to go back to it. But when it comes to actual notes, that's usually done sort of after I've finished the book. I'm just mulling over it and gathering my thoughts in a notebook. So yeah, it's usually hard copy, not too much in the book, although occasionally it is, and then in a notebook afterwards for most of it. Number 12 is from James Holder, and he asks, how many books are in your personal library? How do you organise your books? I've only got a rough estimate. Well, I know that downstairs in here, on this bookcase here, which has got 2 sides of books, it's got, as you can see, it kind of goes through, and then there's a bookcase over there as well. There are, I think, 532 books just downstairs, and then there are books upstairs too, not quite as many. So I think a rough estimate would be somewhere in the mid 600s, so like 650 up to around 700. Don't know for sure, it's just a rough estimate. And they're arranged generally by sort of genre, but also sort of by publisher. So those are sort of general nice books there. You can see some Penguin classics. Over here we've got some Oxford World classics, some vintage Red Spines over there. On the other side there is a general fiction for, sort of, there are just so many miscellaneous publishers. So there's general fiction A to Z, A to Z by author's surname, and then the same for non-fiction as well. On to number 13. This was from Marilyn Maya Mendoza. She asks, do you have a rule around your ambience or atmosphere when reading books? So this is about music and setting, whether you're indoor or outdoors, whether you're around people or alone, whether you're sitting in bed, maybe standing. And for me, I don't have a firm rule for this. My ideal is, maybe sat in my armchair, it's nice and quiet, maybe on a rainy day, maybe at twilight, and I've just got the lamplight next to me. That's my ideal. But I do a lot of reading standing around at train stations and in coffee shops and in all sorts of places, so there's no firm rule to it. The one firm rule I have is that I bring a book wherever I go. Then number 14 from Jim, from Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff. He asks, do you read in languages other than your own? The only other language I know really properly is Welsh. So I grew up going to a Welsh language primary school, but I don't really read that much in Welsh. My Welsh language skills have definitely dropped a bit. I do have to read emails in Welsh from time to time and answer them in Welsh for work. But yeah, other than that, in terms of reading books, not really that much. I was just given very recently this is poems of the Cywyddwr, or Cywyddwyr. I'm not entirely sure what Cywyddwyr means, but it's fairly old Welsh, as I think sort of medieval, early modern Welsh poetry, and just dipping into it here, I can't make that much sense of it. There are odd lines that I get. I tried reading just earlier this poem here called I wraig gŵr arall, which means to another man's wife, which I'm sure will end really, really well. Yeah, I'm going to make a project of this because it seems really interesting, and I do want to push my Welsh language skills a little bit better, a little bit further. And then I think that's all of the questions before me, but I've got one last question, which is my own. And it brings us up to number 15. So we're rocketing through the second part of this. Sorry, it's been really long. I've just been rambling. But number 15 is, do you have a set number of pages or an amount of time you read per day, like as a minimum goal? If not, do you set a limit on how much you read? And for me, I go for the set number or amount of time as a minimum. That tends to help me push myself, and also it means that, you know, it's attainable if I have other things to do, which means most days I'm able to get some reading done. So I tend to say either 20 minutes or 30 pages. I do feel a little bit bad if I haven't managed 30 pages in a day, but if I get a good 20 minutes in at least, then, you know, I feel okay about it. But, you know, for some people it might be more useful to have a limit on how much you read. I know definitely my wife gets very sucked into a book, and I kind of finds it hard to get out and get on with sort of day-to-day tasks. So I think for her, setting a limit, even setting a timer might help. But, you know, we're all different, and yeah. So there we go. That's my prompt, and that's the end of this tag. So I'll have everybody's prompts down in the description, and I'll do my best to make it obvious whose question is whose. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. I'm not going to tag anyone specifically, but if you're watching this and you haven't done this yet, you haven't been tagged, consider yourself tagged, please do it. I'm going to leave this here. Thank you very much. Bye.